Welcome to another George McDonald video. And today I'll be reading from the Unspoken Sermons on Love Thy Neighbor. I just love the sort of Victorian prose that goes on here, and really the long sentences and the carrying of a thought through like almost one paragraph before it resolves, kind of keeps you going and makes for a very disciplined reader to enjoy such luscious prose. There's so much going on, and it's nice to read out loud. So that's one thing I like about George MacDonald's sentences. And I guess there are pretty many people who wrote like this at that time. John Ruskin, I think, also wrote like this, and William Morris, very beautiful poetic prose. And here George MacDonald uses it very effectively to expound on really this important provision or important scripture, you know. And in the world right now, where everybody seems to be forgetting who their neighbor is, I think it's very important that such passages written so many years ago still remind us to be mindful of our neighbors and love them as ourselves. Maybe with that, the world would be a better place. So I'll read from Love Thy Neighbor Unspoken Sermons, Part 1. He who loves not his brother for deeper reasons than those of a common parentage will cease to love him at all. The love that enlarges not its borders, that is not ever spreading and including and deepening, will contract, shrivel, decay, and die. I have had the sons of my mother that I may learn the universal brotherhood. For there is a bond between me and the most wretched liar that ever died for the murder he would not confess, closer infinitely than that which spring only from having one father and mother. That we are the sons and the daughters of God born from his heart, the outcoming offspring of his love, is a bond closer than all other bonds in one. No man ever loved his own child aright who did not love him for his humanity, for his divinity, to the utter forgetting of his own origin from himself. The son of my mother is indeed my brother, and by this greater and closer bond as well. But if I recognize that bond between him and me at all, I recognize it for my race. True. And thank God, the greater excludes not the less. It makes all the weaker bonds stronger and truer, nor forbids that where all are brothers, some should be those of our bosom. Still, my brother according to the flesh is my first neighbor, that we may be very nigh to each other, whether we will or no, while our hearts are tender, and so may learn brotherhood. For our love to each other is but the throbbing of the heart of the great brotherhood, and could come only from the eternal Father, not from our parents. Then my second neighbor appears, and who is he? Whom I come into contact with soever. He with whom I have any transaction, any human dealings whatever. Not the man only with whom I dine, not the friend only with whom I share my thoughts, and not the man only whom my compassion would lift from some slough, but the man who makes my clothes, the man who prints my book, the man who drives me in his cab, the man who begs from me in the street, to whom it may be for brotherhood's sake, I must not give, yea, even the man who condescends to me. With all and each, there is a chance of doing the part of a neighbor, if in no other way yet by speaking truly, acting justly, and thinking kindly. Even these deeds will help to that love which is born of righteousness. All true action clears the spring of right feeling and lets their waters rise and flow. A man must not choose his neighbor, he must take the neighbor that God sends him. In him, whoever he be, lies hidden or revealed, a beautiful brother. The neighbor is just the man who is next to you at the moment, the man with whom any business has brought you in contact. So I don't think there's much to add after such a detailed, such a profound definition of who the brother is and who the neighbor is and how we are all children of one father. So I've been reading St. Augustine as well. So you can see probably a lot of influence that rises from St. Augustine, even the writings of George MacDonald, and I guess any theologian of that time must have been very steeped into St. Augustine, and not just for the theological expositions, but the rhetoric. It's really captivating to read. If you're gonna make a case for Christianity convincingly, then George MacDonald comes along with a very poetic and master of the language of the word. And you see the important role of poetic diction in Christian mysticism, and especially for someone like me who's interested in both. uh, I really understand what C.L.S. Lewis said, that reading George MacDonald baptized his imagination. And so, before I end the video, talking of imagination, this is a dish of oats. It's also George MacDonald, a collection of essays that it did. And I just want to read a short passage here where he talks about the poetic imagination and poetry as as the beginning of all language as we know it. So the importance of poetry in communication, in language, in the imagination, and and creation. The poet as a co-creator with God. So this is from The Imagination, Its Function and Its Culture, which is the first essay on the book. Okay, I'll read. All words, then, belonging to the inner world of the mind, are of the imagination, are originally poetic words. The better, however, any such word is fitted for the deeds of humanity, the sooner it loses its poetic aspect by commonness of use. It ceases to be heard as a symbol and appears only as a sign. Thus, thousands of words, which were originally poetic words, owing their existence to the imagination, lose their vitality and harden into mummies of prose. Not merely in literature does poetry come first and prose afterwards, but poetry is the source of all the language that belongs to the inner world, whether it be of passion or of metaphysics, of psychology or of aspiration. No poetry comes by the elevation of prose, but the half of prose comes by the massing into the common clay of thousands of winged words, whence, like the lovely shells of bygone ages, one is occasionally disinterred by some lover of speech and held up to the light to show the play of color in its manifold laminations. I mean, it's amazing what poets can do with very simple words and stringing them together, massing into the common clay. And suddenly, a simple word that you've had so many times before is filled with this magical sort of presence and deep meaning, and it just speaks to something very primal in you. And I guess each word at one time had such power. And for writers such as George MacDonald, they bring the magic of these words, and in whatever they do, and in his books and in his sermons. And it holds you, with some sort of spell. So I still believe their words, hold such magical qualities. And if they find themselves in the right hands of such a master, there's no telling how much the words can go into communicating these profound principles of Christianity and mythology and fairy tales and all that. So I'll be reading more of George MacDonald, and probably this is not going to be the last video that I do on this writer. And I like to draw the references to Saint Augustine as well as another Christian rhetoric that I really admire and enjoy. Okay, that will be all. Bye bye. Like and subscribe.